In the Simpsons Halloween episode Treehouse of Horror 7, there is a story called Citizen Kang, which I'm sure you've seen. The gist of it is that Kang and Kodos, the two giant green tentacled space aliens, abduct both candidates for president and impersonate them as a means of gaining power for themselves. Homer, luckily, had been abducted by them so that they could find out who the candidates were, and he reveals that they are imposters just before election day. By that point, though, Kang and Kodos are able to say that it's too late to vote for anyone else, and that one of Kang or Kodos is going to have to be the next president. The scene then cuts to the entire Simpson family doing what seems to be slave labour in a death camp, and Homer smugly stands there and says, "Well, I voted for Kodos." This has become something of a meme, given how deeply classic Simpsons is ingrained in our culture. "I voted for Kodos" is a shorthand way of mocking politics by suggesting that all candidates are green tentacled space aliens and that the outcome is going to be just as bad whatever happens. Here's the thing though, if Homer was right, and Kodos would have punished humanity slightly less, if Kodos would have made life ever so slightly better, then Homer was not only right to vote for Kodos, but it was the only ethical choice that he could ever make. What I'm talking about here in a roundabout way is tactical voting. Voting for the least bad candidate who you think has a chance of winning the election, rather than your favourite candidate who might have no chance at all. I believe that tactical voting, however counterintuitive it might seem, is the only choice that you can ever make. And in order to prove why, I'm going to have to use a few examples. But first, one small digression. I am, of course, aware that proportional systems solve literally all of these problems. I've used STV in Northern Ireland and MMP in Scotland, and both of them work well. But unfortunately, the US and the UK, unlike other smarter countries, haven't adopted them for national elections. So, we have to deal with it. Sorry. Okay, first example, Bath, a marginal seat at the 2015 UK general election. The five parties contesting the seat of Bath were the five parties contesting that election in England: Labour, the Greens, the Liberal Democrats, the Conservatives, and UKIP. They all had various differences of policy, but it is worth noting one ideological fault line. The Greens, Labour and the Liberal Democrats all generally prioritised welfare spending. They wanted more environmental protections, they wanted an internationalist foreign policy, including remaining a member of the European Union, and they wanted a reversal of the government's economic policies towards a more expansionary fiscal policy. UKIP and the Conservatives, on the other hand, wanted to cut spending in order to balance the budget, they wanted to cut regulation in order to benefit businesses, they wanted a referendum on membership of the European Union, and they wanted to continue or intensify the previous government's economic policies. I'm not making a value judgment on those policies in this video, but I am saying that those parties were far more similar to each other than they were to any of the parties in the other group. It also means that anyone voting for one of the parties would have their interests represented much better by one of the similar parties than one of the very different ones. If you care about what the Labour Party care about, then you are far more likely to care about what the Green Party care about than you are to care about what UKIP care about. This was problematic in Bath in 2015 because the results were like this. As you can see, though the Lib Dems, Labour and the Greens put together had enough votes to win the seat, they split the vote enough that the Conservative was able to win on a plurality. If enough Labour or Green voters had switched to the Liberal Democrats, the Conservative would have been defeated. This matters not because of party politics. This matters because those people, those Labour and Green voters, will be misrepresented in the next Parliament on votes about intervening in Syria, about the European Union, about cutting tax credits. They will be represented by someone who represents the opposite viewpoint to them because they did not vote tactically to safeguard their interests. And it's extremely frustrating because it's easily solvable. If just a third of those Labour and Green voters had bit their tongue and voted for the Liberal Democrat candidate, that Conservative MP wouldn't be able to stand up in the Commons and do all the things a Conservative MP does. Those people would have their interests better represented in Parliament, which is really what democracy should do. This is disturbingly common, and it doesn't just happen on the political left. Look at the 2013 Eastleigh by-election, two right-wing Eurosceptic candidates splitting the vote and allowing a centre-left Europhile Liberal Democrat to get elected. As long as first past the post exists, and I wish it didn't exist for major elections, these problems will happen, but the only solution to get better representation is to vote tactically for the candidate you dislike least rather than the candidate you like most. I think that is just the most important choice for you to get better representation in your future parliament or congress or whatever. And yes, at this point you're probably turning around to me and thinking that really it doesn't make that much difference. It's not that important who you got represented by. And if you think like that, well, here's one final example. The 2000 US presidential election in Florida. If you know anything about that election, you know that it was extremely close nationally, and extremely, extremely close in Florida. It was separated by 537 votes among millions, a minuscule percentage. But what you might not know is that though George Bush came in first place and Al Gore came in second place, in third place came Ralph Nader, who got a tiny percentage of the vote, but it was 97,000 votes. Those 97,000 voters were voting for a social and environmental activist who wanted to raise the minimum wage and provide free education and protect the environment. Can you really argue that it would not have been better for them to vote for Al Gore and prevent what ended up being an 8-year, extremely destructive presidency of George W. Bush? I don't think you can. And I don't think you can ever argue that all mainstream politicians are the same. Some are always going to be better than others. That's why I will always, always endorse tactical voting. Basically, what I want the moral of this video to be is that if you're an American and you're planning on voting for either Gary Johnson or Jill Stein, then you're a